So we're going to move on to the next part, but let's look at analyzing key ideas and details. Number 1, citing text evidence. Identify those parts of the text that help explain why people might have identified so closely with Andrew Jackson. Number 2, determining central ideas. Some opponents claim that Jackson acted like a tyrant after he took office. How does the phrase "to the victors belong the spoils" relate to that accusation? Jackson as president. Guiding question. How did Andrew Jackson make the American political system more democratic? Andrew Jackson had qualities most Americans admired. He was a patriot, a self-made man, and a war hero. Thousands of ordinary people came to Washington for his inauguration. Later, many attended a White House reception. Expanded voting rights. President Andrew Jackson promised equal protection and equal benefits for all Americans, at least all white American men. Jackson's promise reflected the spirit of the times. So take a moment and take a look at this picture. We get a little description right here. Andrew Jackson's supporters gather outside the White House, hoping to shake hands with a president who seemed to be just like them. Determining meaning. Break down the term spoils system. In this context, what is the meaning of the word spoils? How did this system get its name? In the nation's early years, only men who owned property or paid taxes could vote or hold political office. By the 1820s, many states had loosened these requirements. White male sharecroppers, factory workers, and others could now participate in the political process. By 1828, nearly all states let voters, rather than state legislatures, choose presidential electors. Women still could not vote or hold political office. African Americans and Native Americans had few rights of any kind. Making government more democratic. Democrats wanted to further open government to the people. They argued that ordinary citizens could do most government jobs. They were disturbed that the federal government had become a bureaucracy, a system in which non-elected officials carry out laws. Soon after taking office, in 1829, Jackson fired many federal workers and replaced them with his supporters. The fired employees protested. They charged that the president was acting like a tyrant. One Jackson supporter said, "To the victors belong the spoils." In other words, because Jackson had won the election, his supporters had the right to the spoils, or benefits, of victory. This practice of replacing current government employees with supporters of the winner is called the spoils system. Jackson's supporters also abandoned the unpopular caucus system, in which top party leaders chose the party's candidates for office. Instead, parties began using the nominating conventions, where delegates from the states chose the party's presidential candidate. This system allowed many more people to participate in the selection of candidates. Checking for understanding. Number 1, explaining cause and effect. How did nominating conventions make the U.S. system of government more democratic? Number 2, explaining issues. In addition to nominating conventions, what are 2 other ways Andrew Jackson made the U.S. government more democratic? We're going to look at the biography of Andrew Jackson, 1767 to 1845. Like many of his supporters, Andrew Jackson was born in a log cabin. A noted war hero, Jackson was called Old Hickory because he was said to be as tough as a hickory stick. Small farmers, craftspeople, and others who felt left out of the expanding American economy admired Jackson. They felt that his rise from a log cabin to the White House demonstrated the kind of success story possible only in the United States. Drawing conclusions. Why do you think most American voters would identify with a candidate from humble beginnings? Analyzing key ideas and details. Number 1. Summarizing. Summarize a text explanation for why tariff debate existed. Number 2. Analyzing central ideas. Explain how Calhoun's toast at the Washington dinner in 1830 contradicted Jackson's position on nullification. The tariff debate. Guiding question. How did a fight over tariffs become a debate about states' rights versus federal rights? A tariff is a tax on imported goods. The high tariff on European manufactured goods was pleasing to northeastern factory owners. Tariffs made European goods more expensive. This encouraged Americans to buy American-made goods. Southerners disliked the tariff. They had a profitable trade selling their cotton to Europe. They feared that taxing European goods might hurt this trade. In addition, tariffs meant higher prices for the goods they bought from their European trading partners. In 1828, Congress had passed a very high tariff law. Vice President Calhoun claimed that a state had the right to nullify or refuse to accept a federal law if it was not in that state's best interest. President Jackson disagreed with this reasoning. He feared that nullification would destroy the Union. In 1830, at a Washington dinner marking Thomas Jefferson's birthday, Jackson chose to make his feelings on nullification known. He offered a toast. Looking directly at Calhoun, the president declared, "Our Union, it must be preserved." Answering Jackson's challenge, the vice president rose with a toast of his own. "The Union, next to our liberty, most dear." To make his meaning clear, Calhoun added, "It can only be preserved by respecting the rights of the states." Not long after Jackson and Calhoun faced off at the dinner, Congress passed the Maysville Road Bill. The bill provided federal funds for the building of a road in Kentucky. Jackson vetoed the bill. Jackson argued that because the road would be entirely within Kentucky, it should be a state project. In other words, the federal government should support only projects that benefited the entire nation. In 1832, Congress passed a lower tariff. It was not enough to cool the protest in the South. South Carolina passed the Nullification Act, declaring it would not pay, quote, illegal, unquote, tariffs. Next page. The state threatened to secede or break away from the Union if the federal government interfered. Jackson believed in a strong Union. He asked Congress to pass the Force Bill, the granting of military powers to enforce the tariff was specifically outlined in Section 5 of the Act. And be it further enacted that whenever the President of the United States shall be officially informed by the authorities of any state, any law or laws of the United States, or the execution thereof, is obstructed by the employment of military force, or by any other unlawful means, too great to be overcome by the ordinary course of judicial proceeding, it shall be lawful for him, the President of the United States, forthwith to issue his proclamation, declaring such fact or information, and requiring all such military and other force forthwith to disperse. And if at any time after issuing such proclamation, any such opposition or obstruction shall be made, the President shall be authorized promptly to employ such means to suppress the same, and to cause the said laws or process to be duly executed, as are authorized and provided in the cases entitled, An Act to Provide for Calling Forth the Militia to Execute the Laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, repel invasions, and to repeal the act now in force for that purpose, and also by the act entitled An Act Authorizing the Employment of the Land and Naval Forces of the United States in cases of insurrection. South Carolina accepted the new tariff, but nullified the Force Bill. Checking for understanding. Number 1. Explaining effects. How might the workers at a factory in the Northeast react to the lowering of the tariff? Number 2. Explaining issues. Why did Jackson veto the Maysville Road Bill? Analyzing primary sources, determining central ideas. What is the main idea of this text? Number 2, determining meaning. What is the meaning of the phrase, and if at any time after issuing such proclamation, any such opposition or obstruction shall be made, the President shall be authorized promptly to employ such means to suppress the same. Lesson 1 review and activities. Time and place. Number 1, explaining issues. In what ways did Jackson's presidency reflect the times? What were some of the positive influences of his presidency? And in what ways were his decisions limited by the thinking of the time? Building history, social science, analysis skills. Number 2, explaining cause and effect. How do you think new election campaign methods affected American democracy? Number 3, how did the election of 1828 demonstrate the growth of democracy? Number 4, explaining issues. How was the fight over tariffs related to the issue of states' rights? Writing about history. Number 5, explanatory writing. Andrew Jackson once said, "One man with courage makes a majority." Write a paragraph explaining what you think Jackson meant by this quote and how this idea influenced his leadership. Collaborating. Number 6, presenting with a partner, make a pro/con chart regarding states having the power to nullify federal laws. Share your chart with the class. You do not have to write down any of these answers. These are more for you to think about. For the next video, we'll go on to lesson 2.